contribution was interesting, but quite honestly, it was not a serious contribution to a Communist Party polemic against Trotskyism. For example, the comrade said that the IMG's position is that the oppression of women arises only with capitalism. Now, every single person in this room knows that that is not the IMG's position, not the Fourth International's position, and it's not the position of anybody on the Marxist left, as far as I'm aware, unless they're completely ignorant and stupid. I will just modify that statement one little bit, and that is to say this, that the comrade knows, or ought to know, that along with the women comrades in the Communist Party, she will need the support of the women comrades in the IMG and the other socialist women comrades in the women's liberation movement against a very large part of her own party. For example, she will need the support of a very prominent member of the British Communist Party, like, for example, Fergus Nicholson, who writes that we have to ditch all this trendy, petty bourgeois radical cause like women's lib. And the comrade also knows that Fergus is not speaking for himself. He's speaking for massive communist parties in a massive area of Europe. Because the fact of the matter is that Stalinism has done the women in Eastern Europe no good whatsoever. Now, Comrade Johnson ended his speech by appealing to us to at least agree with the class consciousness of Carter and Kissinger. It was a strong point, but it doesn't get us all that far. I could quote to him the class consciousness and intelligence of the Times. Because what did the Times say about the Italian Communist Party? I'll quote you what it said in an editorial. It said this: in Italy, for instance, one can imagine a Christian democratic communist coalition proving no less corrupt and impotent than the various other coalitions that have already been tried. That was the Times' view. It said, let's not have this coalition, let's just have the Italian Communist Party in, and perhaps that will help to get rid of the corruption in Christian democracy, having a spell in opposition. I'm not saying the Times is right on that, I'm just saying it doesn't get us all that far, to quote the class consciousness of these people. Secondly, let's get down to the serious debate. The comrades say, and Monty says, they're against the parliamentary road to socialism. They have never come out for the parliamentary road to socialism. Monty is right. I don't think you'll find a single quotation that says the British Communist Party is for the parliamentary road to socialism. The comrades say we combine mass struggle outside Parliament with a struggle inside Parliament. That sounds reasonable enough. We are in favour, in principle, of getting our comrades into Parliament and engaging in a struggle there, and we're also in favour of mass struggle outside Parliament. So what is the debate about? The debate is essentially about where the dominant forces, the decisive forces are that are actually going to destroy the bourgeoisie, and what form of organisation is necessary and what forms of struggle are necessary in order to weld those forces together into the strike force that's going to destroy capitalism. And here we find, consistently, in the tactics and strategy, and increasingly with the Italian Communist Party in the programme of these parties, a consistent tendency to subordinate the mass struggle outside parliamentary representative assemblies to the engagement in tactical manoeuvres with other parties inside these assemblies. That, in fact, is now, in Italy, been theorized. by the leaders of the Italian Communist Party. For example, in Grau's book, which Monty will know, quite explicitly says that there is something new now in the Italian Communist Party. He says, "Our attitude towards elected assemblies, and Parliament above all, constitutes one of the genuine new features of the present strategy of the Communist Party." And he goes on to say what this new feature is: to define representative assemblies as such an essential factor, unlike, in fact, the other factors such as mass struggle. They regard it as the essential factor. And quite frankly, it's not just a question of reading what people like Grau or other theorists say, because what we find is that consistently the Italian Communist Party approaches the entire class struggle in Italy from the point of view of damping down, as Mandel pointed out, damping down, containing, constricting within the framework of bourgeois society the mass movement in Italy in order precisely to achieve its historic compromise. And even the small British Communist Party here, look at the record. The British Communist Party's militants, and Sam Aronovich is right to say that he and most other militants in the British Communist Party, especially the older militants, joined that party as revolutionaries and fought inside that party for many years in order to overthrow capitalism. And the Communist Party militants, during the period of Tory rule, were in the leadership of every single significant struggle against the Tories. And why is it that the British Communist Party was not able to transform that fact into a mass rank-and-file movement in the unions? Because the British Communist Party, in a smaller way, but with the same kind of strategy as the Italians, subordinated those hundreds of thousands of militants to their need for alliances with the lefts like Scanlon, only to find those lefts breaking to the right and imposing exactly the kind of things that the Italian bourgeoisie is attempting to oppose in Italy on the British workers. And that is why the British Communist Party is in a crisis today, why its industrial work is in a crisis, and why there's a big debate going on in the British Communist Party. My time is running out, so I just want to say this to Monty. He makes a fair point when he says that it's necessary for us to look critically at our own movement and our own movement's traditions. But the revolutionary movement in Europe is not a matter simply, as he well knows, of the subjective vigor of small revolutionary vanguards. And what Monty completely fails to do is to look at the balance sheet of the last 30 years in Europe, because if you look at that balance sheet, what do you find? At no time in Europe's history, certainly not in the 20th century, has the working class been objectively stronger than at the end of the Second World War. And the communist movement in Europe also enormously strong. Furthermore, in one whole half of Europe, you had takeovers by the East European communist parties under the aegis of the Soviet leadership and the Red Army. And what do we find as a result of all that? We find that those very takeovers in Eastern Europe, far from increasing the combativity and organization and class consciousness of the working class in Western Europe, led to a demoralization, a cynicism, a disillusionment with socialism on the part of the workers in Western Europe. We have never said, or if we've said it, we were wrong to say, that what has happened in Western Europe since the war is simply because of the social democratic betrayers in the West European labor movements. What has happened there is precisely because of the strength of Stalinism in Eastern Europe, and for Monty to try to say that we have ever underestimated that strength is completely false. And the tragedy of the situation is that as far as the militants in the Communist Party in Britain and elsewhere is concerned, in the face of the record of Stalinism, instead of turning back to the program of Soviet power, of independent mass mobilizations, launched by the Communist International and the Russian Revolution, they instead have turned over to bourgeois democracy and class collaboration. And I would say this: we have not had a clear explanation from these comrades as to why Soviet power, why a state of a higher type, a higher order than either bourgeois democracy or Stalinism in the East is now out of date. I say that Lenin's State and Revolution may have been premature in 1917. It is certainly not premature today. The arguments they give us completely contradict each other. They used to have the argument that Soviets are no longer necessary because of the balance of forces changing after the Second World War. And we know what that means. Soviets are not necessary because of the might of the Soviet state. Okay, let's have an elaboration of this. What will the Soviet leadership's attitude be to the growing crisis of capitalism in Western Europe? Will it objectively assist the workers' movement in Western Europe, or will it not? Let's have an analysis of that. Now we have other arguments come up, the direct reverse of this. They say Soviets, we're against those, not because they're no longer necessary, because of the changed balance of forces in favor of the working class, but because they're not possible, because the bourgeoisie is too strong. That is the argument put forward by Carrillo, that's the argument put forward by other communists. But we've never had a really systematic and clear explanation of why Soviet power, why the struggle for Soviet power, and everything that goes along with that. In all our actions, in all our interventions, including in Parliament, strengthening the independent mobilization of the working class, in every struggle, like the Granwick struggle, not simply putting forward immediate demands, but putting forward demands of a transitional character objectively necessary to carry the thing forward. That means in Granwicks, we have to put forward demands like nationalization of Granwicks under workers' control, demands of these sort. These are the kind of things that are necessary. I say to the Communist Party members who are here, go back to Leninism, because Leninism is now current and topical and contemporary to the situation here.